Right, welcome back to another video. In this episode, we are going to look at how we can tackle range and domain under the natural logarithmic function, or range and domain when we are given the natural logarithmic functions. All right, so let's dive into it and look at this particular two problems. Okay, so problem number one, we are to find the domain and the range, or the range and the domain. So first, let's look at the first problem, which is f of x equals 3 into 4x minus 6, right? So this particular here, first, when you want to find the domain, so for the domain, right, for the domain, we have this particular problem here. You know that lane doesn't take any number less than 0. So lane only take positive numbers greater than 0, right? So we can say that lane, any expression inside the lane should be greater than 0. So we have this expression in here, 4x minus 6 should be greater than 0. So we say that 4x should be greater than 6. So we have x to be greater than 6 on 4. And that is basically x is what? Greater than 2 goes here, 2, and 2 goes here, 3. So we have 3 on 2. So this, we can say that the domain for this particular problem is either 3 on 2 or infinity. That should be excluded. These numbers should be excluded, right? So the domain for this particular problem, the domain for this particular problem, the domain of f is going to be 3 on 2, 3 on 2, and infinity. All excluded, all excluded, all excluded, right? Because when you put 3 on 2 here, right, you're going to have 4 times 3 on 2, and that is 2 goes here, you have 6 minus 6, right? And that is going to give you 0. And you know as well that lane doesn't take is any number less than 0, right? Any number less or equal to 0. So lane only takes positive numbers greater than 0. So you don't include this particular number 3 on 2 and infinity. So apart from these two elements, any other elements are considered to be part of the domain. So the domain for this particular function is 3 on 2 and infinity. So we exclude those numbers. We exclude those numbers. So that is the sign for exclusion. That is the interval form of writing this domain. So let's look at the range. So for range, whatever this number you are having here, for range, once you have a lane function, any number at all for x, okay, will form a range, but with the exception of negative infinity and positive infinity. Any number at all will form, will be part of the range, will be part of the range at all, with the exception of negative infinity and positive infinity. So with the range, we can say that we have negative infinity and positive infinity all excluded. F of x equals negative ln into 4s squared minus 4 minus 5, right? So for this, for the domain, we can say that, as usual, we know that ln doesn't take any number less or equal to 0. So it should be greater than 0. So any number should be greater than 0. Okay, so we take this expression in the ln, and that should be greater than 0. So we're going to have 4s squared minus 4, and that should be greater than 0. So we have this expression 4x squared should be greater than 4. And that means that, or that implies that x squared is greater than 1. So we take any number apart from plus or minus positive 1. Any number apart from plus or minus positive 1. Plus or minus 1. Okay, so the domain for this particular problem is going to be, the domain of f is going to be -1 and 1 union, right? Union -1 and -infinity, -1 and -infinity, union +1 and infinity. So any of these elements qualifies to be part of the domain. So the domain for this second function are this element excluded, right? So you can consider any other number for the domain, but don't consider this element. Okay, so we have for the range, for the range, you know that for range, it takes all values of what? X. Okay, so with the exception of -infinity and +infinity. So the range for this particular function is going to be -infinity to +infinity. Basically, the range is basically these two elements, the -infinity and the +infinity. Apart from this element, any other element qualifies to be part. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate your time. Don't forget to subscribe, share, comment, and I'll give you more updates. Bye-bye.